So when I kind of applied or sort of internally applied for the interim director of youth ministry job, I didn't mention on my application or in my interview that when I was younger, I was kind of a pyromaniac. Don't worry, your kids are safe, but I don't know, I think maybe, I don't know if any of you can relate to this, and maybe it's a gender thing, but I was fascinated by fire. I was fascinated that you could make it out of nothing, that it was somehow so ordinary and close to us, but also so different and so mysterious and so unlike other matter or other stuff that's around us. So I would do, little things. My favorite thing to do, I had a little mouth spray. Remember Banaka, the breath freshener? Well, it turns out that's very flammable. So I would kind of have my little portable blowtorch or flamethrower. Just, nothing too bad, just random stuff. Then when I was a little older, I went to this wonderful wilderness adventure camp in the northern part of Minnesota called Minojin. It's where the boundary waters are, one of the most beautiful places on earth. One of the most exciting things about this camp was that we got to build our own fires. I was like in 8th grade, and I was really excited about that. But it turns out building a fire that is going to last long enough to keep a bunch of 13-year-old boys warm and cook their meal is a little bit harder than spraying a Banaka over a flame. So I think that's kind of what's happening here with Moses. There's an easy way to look at this story, which is that Moses was kind of just a dude, and then this intense mountaintop experience happened, somehow involving a bush on fire, and then he was transformed into this amazing leader who led his people to freedom, who became himself the liberating power of God for his people. But if you actually look at the story, and it wasn't all here, but it was when I introduced it, what I want to try to suggest is something a little different, and it's maybe a way into understanding what this mysterious business about a flame or a fire that does not consume a bush, what that means. So if you read the story, Moses is kind of a special guy. He is raised Egyptian, but he's also Jewish. And the first time he sees one of his own people, outside of the palace, being mistreated, this thing wells up in him, this almost instinctual, spontaneous reaction to stop the suffering, to protect the innocent Jewish person that's getting beaten. He does it in maybe not the most responsible way. He kills the Egyptian guy, and that means he has to leave. He has to flee the authorities. Then what happens once he goes up to the mountain and has this kind of powerful experience of God? If we pay close attention, Moses, not much changes for Moses. Like he doesn't get superpowers. He gets this staff that turns into a snake, okay, but in general, he's still kind of the same guy. He doesn't become a wizard, or he doesn't become this wise, powerful, handsome man. In fact, he kind of says to God, he's like, I have a speech impediment. I'm not really good at this public speaking thing. And God is like, we'll work with you. It's okay. What he does do, though, what does happen are a couple things. One is Moses is called by name. God says, I want you to do this thing. I want you to do this special, amazing thing, which is going to make you a leader and free your people. And he says another thing. This is a little after. Moses says, how will this work, God? How am I going to pull this off? And God says, I will be with you. So remember those two things for a second. I'm kind of preaching, this is the way we preach at Root and Branch. It's a little bit more spontaneous, conversational. So if I stare off into space, let's just roll with it. So I think, okay, so if we look a little more carefully, that still doesn't really explain what a bush that is on fire, like why is that how God appeared? When we were pitching the idea for Root and Branch a long time ago, someone kind of was very suspicious about our name, Root and Branch. It's like, that doesn't sound very biblical. It sounds kind of like a plant nursery or something. And I picked this in part because God appears in a lot of beautiful nature imagery in the Bible, and I think that's something we should pay attention to. But I think this burning bush appeals to me because I think we're at a moment right now where we need a little bit more fire. You know, in the Bible, the Holy Spirit is often talked about as coming in flames, tongues of flame is what happens in Acts to these early Christians. Fire is sort of an image of intensity and passion and aliveness. And if you kind of look across the American landscape and you're someone who cares about places like this, communities like First Congregational or now Root and Branch, I think there's a little bit of a lack of that kind of fire. I think a lot of people are worried about the future of progressive Christianity. And I think paying attention to this image of how God comes in fire might give us clues as to how we might bring that passion back. So I think it does that in three ways. And I'm going to risk getting into a little trouble because I'm kind of going to pick a little fight with Lily and Daniel because she's not here and can't call me on it. But it's something we've talked about, and it stems in part from, she and Seth went to Yale, I went to University of Chicago, and there's kind of a different, they're called the Yale School and the U Chicago School. There's sort of a different intellectual and theological tradition that are represented. On the one hand, Yale is really influenced by this guy, Karl Barth. He was this Swiss-German theologian who, his big thing was responding to liberal Christians who said, we can see why Christianity is awesome and why it's important, but we can also see the things that it cares about and the things it brings us to are also in art. They're also in, philosophy. They're also in other attempts to kind of uplift humanity and make things better in this world, in movements for social change that bring justice to people and lift them up. The Christianity, what Karl Barth was saying is that if you start to see God, or what Christianity is talking about in all these other places, you're going to weaken what it is we do here in the church. You see what I mean? It's just kind of, everything becomes fine. Why do you, at the end of the day, if you can find liberation through political movement and transcendence through literature, reading a beautiful poem or seeing a painting, why go to church at all? Why can't you just get it in these other places? But then on the other side, the guy who I kind of take the side of when Leanne and I argue, his name is Paul Tillich, and he was really influential for someone like me getting into Christianity at a kind of a late age. I didn't grow up in the church. And Paul Tillich says, of course, what happens in the church happens in these other places. And of course, we need to kind of have a more fluid relationship. And that was helpful for me because I had kind of these spiritual experiences that I didn't know how to make sense of. And someone that could kind of correlate or show how what Christianity is doing is similar to what you're experiencing in other ways was really helpful for me to make sense of Christianity and get into it. But I think this burning bush image of God maybe shows us that we're both a little bit wrong, or that one side or the other is incomplete. There maybe needs to be a third way. So the first way I think that it kind of gives us a third way is something that I run into a lot trying to talk about church to people, which is the idea that religious people believe in this spooky supernatural stuff that I just can't That's just not my experience of that's just not my experience of my life or the world. I look around me and bushes don't light on fire, or I read these stories and it seems like how could that have anything to do with my life? God working in these parting waters, lighting bushes on fire, raising people from the dead? Like that does not jive with my experience or what it seems like scientists tell us is possible. And then on the other hand, it's not just their fault. A lot of religious folks, I think today, the loudest voices, still have a quite supernaturalist view. Supernaturalist in this sense, which is that, God really did those miracles exactly as they're told, and God still can today, and if you don't believe, that's probably why you're not seeing them, or you don't have enough faith. And I think that just leaves other people they're not going to engage. So what I'm proposing is if we actually look at what's happening in the burning bush, it's neither one nor the other quite. I don't think when we read about Moses encountering God in a flaming plant, we're supposed to think that's literally how God works in our lives today. And nor do I think we should waste our time like some people have done trying to understand what actually happened. There's actually a bush in the Middle East that secretes a flammable liquid, and sometimes if it gets hot or the right conditions happen, it'll spontaneously combust, leaving the bush intact. Look it up on Wikipedia if you don't believe me. But that's this kind of weird debate where I think both are missing the point, and we need more people, more religious folks, talking about what the point really is, which is that in the world as it is, in the world, if we look around, if we look at it with the right eyes, if we're open to it, we can see burning bushes in our lives. We can see everyday normal matter, everyday normal experiences. We can see literally the trees in the woods behind my parents' house where I first kind of started to see God, or we can see in the face of someone we love or the face of someone we care about. We can see a breaking through, a vibrancy, a difference, something that is more full of light and warmth, and it's more beautiful, and it's more real. We can have those experiences. Lillian likes to make fun of the guy who says, I see God in the sunset. And I actually find it hard. I find it hard to see. I think a lot of people find it hard to see God in the sunset. Not every time the sun sets or rises do I have a beautiful vision of God, or do I feel really moved. I'm probably, thinking about the stuff I have to do, the work I got to get done or something. But I think for this, I love the image of this old crusty guy, John Calvin, without whom we wouldn't be here today in the UCC. Another crusty old theologian who wrote too much. And his vision of nature and the world was that God, in creating nature, left sparks of divinity all over it that are there. We can see these sparks, and that's how we know God is real. So it's not like someone who doesn't go to church can't see God. In fact, maybe they have a sort of experience of God that we could stand to get in touch with and learn from. Calvin's idea was that you go to church to get spectacles. He called them like the spectacles, like scripture and story and practice and working together can help us get these glasses, not that cloud out reality or change it, but that help us see those sparks more often, help us see God in nature, in each other, in our experiences, in our lives. So that's the first kind of binary that I think this can challenge. First opposition. The second one is sort of related, but a little bit different. It's about kind of the spiritual but not religious folks, which is a lot of the people we're trying to connect with in Root and Branch. People who are curious about spirituality, that sort of may have had some of those sparks in their lives, but they don't know what to do with them or how to bring them into their lives more fully or how to live in it in community. And one of the things that I've found is that it's not really helpful to deny the power of the ways they experience God. A lot of the people I meet actually, I think, are doing things that are the kind of things we should be doing in church. One example is people I meet who are involved in activism or community organizing or politics or service in their community. This is not just a sort of easy thing. This is something that people engage in because it speaks deeply to who they are. It helps change them into more loving, compassionate people. It takes them outside of themselves. It involves them in community. There's challenge. A lot of these people are kind of constantly trying to live up to their best selves. Another one where we live, there are a lot of artists and musicians. I think people experience community and transcendence and connection through art. And actually, I think we as a church stand to learn some things. I think the church used to be a place where that kind of stuff did happen. The church used to be a place where creating culture was part of experiencing the divine, where, you don't have to go back this far, but think of someone like Bach, who people are still listening to today, and that was sacred music. Or someone like Michelangelo, or even not so long ago, like the great Tommy Dorsey, who we just sang a song, like Gospel in Chicago is another example of that. And I think today, when you look out at the religious landscape, that a lot of the people who are doing that are just sort of the evangelicals, and they're doing it kind of poorly. And if people want to experience moving expressions of art and culture, they're more likely to go to a concert today, or a music festival, or to the art museum. And if we believe that part of creating a relationship with God through beauty, through this kind of piercing through, we need to start stepping into that. We need to be creating new things. The church, played a huge role in the abolitionist movement to end slavery. It played a huge role in the late 19th century. There was a popular movement to lift up poor and working folks. There was the age of the robber barons, where they had everything, and people like William Jennings Bryan were motivating people with a fiery passion to fight for more equality. And then, of course, the civil rights movement is another example for that. But if you look today, that's not really happening. Some of the biggest movements today that are happening are not being led or being infused with fire from the church. I mean, there are exceptions. The UCC and First Congregational is an amazing exception, being out front and welcoming people of all walks of life, all sexualities. But if you look overall, we're not really leading the charge. The church in America is not. You could maybe say the same with the environmental movement. I think the church is often kind of playing catch-up to the culture. So, this sounds kind of dismal, but I think that the church still does have a role to play. And it again relates to this burning bush image of God. One option again is say, we don't need church anymore, we got all these other things. I can go to therapy to feel more love and work out my issues and become a more loving person. I can do politics, watch a TED Talk instead of a sermon. That's fine if you want to do that. Not on your phone right now. The other option is, this kind of, there's a stone wall around the church, and everything good and meaningful happens in here, and out there it's the corrupt world, it's the world of secular society and moral decay. And I think this image is, again, neither one of those. This image of a fire, of God being a fire that enlightens and warms and brings heat and light, but doesn't corrupt, doesn't change what it's affecting, I think applies to the same thing. God, if we learn how to experience God more in our lives, is not something that eliminates all these other parts, but illuminates and brings warmth to them. It brings warmth and illumination to our family life, to our work life, to our political commitments, to our engagements with art. And it does not say they're wrong, it just brings out what they're really meant to do. The third thing is I think another common thing I run into and prevents a lot of people from going to church, which is a sort of mistaken, in my opinion, view of what things like sin or getting saved or becoming whole, becoming justified, if you use an old-fashioned term, what that means. I think the common conception is that means we're basically sinners, we're basically bad, there's something wrong with us, and we need God or we need Jesus to make us into better people. Kind of like what I was saying before, like Moses sort of started off kind of just a schmuck, and then he had this experience of God, and then he was the Moses we all know and love. I think, again, that is completely missing the point. I don't think that's biblical. I think an encounter with God is like that fire that brings us alive, but does not consume who we already were. I think God's love works in a way that recognizes and allows us to be the fullness of our created self. You know, remember way back before the Garden of Eden, we were created in God's image. Before original sin, we were created good. I think, again, that kind of supernatural or God needs to come into my life and be this addition, this thing that wasn't there, I think that's not this God. That's not the burning bush that makes us more fully alive and fully enlightened, but deals with what is already there. That's what God does with Moses. But again, you could come back to me and say, well, I can find that in other ways. I think the reason we still need the word God, or a word like it, God comes from a German word, so it doesn't really have to be that word, but it works. It works for me. For some people, it doesn't. But that we need that some kind of word. Here, the word that God says when Moses is like, who are you? Who do I tell people sent me? God says, does anyone know? Anyone remember? What? I am. I am that I am. Exactly. What the heck does that mean? God says, I am that I am. We need something like that. We need something, a word or a set-apart thing we are all looking at that is pointing beyond itself to this mystery. I am that I am, the way I interpret that is something like, you don't know what I am. You're not going to tell me how to be. I am beyond all of your attempts to understand how I work, beyond all of your attempts to kind of manage and control me and make me fit in your life just the way you want. I am that mysterious presence that is everywhere and that you can never say it's right here. I think that, for me, is a reason we still need God, because that points to this fiery love that is, again, not in any particular thing, but can bring all the particular things that we do to life. So, when I was an intern here, a few years ago, my first year as an intern, we had a mid-year evaluation just to see how we're doing, how is this going, and I had been having a great time at Glen, and I felt like I was connecting with people. I was a little nervous about being in a church. It was my first time really spending a lot of time in church, but I was feeling pretty good about it. And sort of partway through the conversation, it was pretty good, but Lillian, who's my supervisor, asked me, how's the pastoral care you're doing going? I was seeing a woman in a senior facility almost weekly. And I said, it's all right, it's good. Sometimes I feel like maybe I'm not really getting through, or I don't know what I'm doing. I said, what? She said, why do you think that is? And I said, I don't know, maybe I don't know, I'm not experienced enough. And then she said something that made me feel kind of like Moses when he doesn't want to look at God. She said, I think your issue is that you think that you can help people by being charming. You can help people by being kind of the nice guy who puts them in a good mood and helps them not think about their problems, kind of takes them into a sunny, happy place. And she said, that tendency in you is getting in the way of actually doing ministry, of actually bringing something real to this person. And when she said that, I felt fire kind of through my body. I felt the fire of kind of shame, of kind of like, oh, I'm found out. Someone saw me. They know my tricks. They know. But I also felt at the same time that the message she was giving me was, you don't have to put on a show. You don't have to be something you're not. You don't have to be the charming guy. Who you already are is good enough. The person you already are, which includes, I don't know all the answers to your problem. I don't know how to make you feel better. I don't know how to distract you from the fear you're feeling, or the pain you're feeling, or the grief you're feeling. All that stuff is getting in the way of some real godly encounter. So I felt this kind of fire that was not pleasant because I was found out and my normal tricks were kind of being poked at, but at the same time, I felt attention and care, and someone who just wanted me to be my true self. I think that's the kind of space we need to be creating in church if we want to sort of ignite a new passion for this kind of work, a new passion for the work of doing this weird old-fashioned thing called church. I think we need to be creating those fiery spaces, the spaces of love that is direct and that really sees people for the full kind of complicated, messy, imperfect selves that we are, and that through that we can become a better version of ourselves, the version we were meant to be, the version we already were. And that's what we're trying to do at Root and Branch. I'm inspired by the model you guys have set here. I think this is a place where the walls between inside and outside aren't so hard. I mean, witness the beautiful artwork in this room, artwork that doesn't try to paint a rosy picture over human suffering, but brings it into the space. The time I've spent with the guys group, or now with the senior high youth, we're creating that space too here, a space where people can not have to pretend like they're something they're not, where they can just feel that love that expands who they are, that expands their nature into their fullest self. We're trying to do that in ways that even speak to people who don't know how to pray. You know, here we have joys and concerns, and we say a prayer to God. A lot of people who are coming to our church, or some people, aren't sure they know, can you talk to God? Is that something that makes them feel, what is that? Who are we talking to? So we're trying to find ways of bringing this kind of fiery, godly love into that space and making it real and alive to people. So we're doing things like writing down on cards and then projecting on the wall stuff that is wonderful in people's lives and stuff that's hurting. To kind of show rather than tell how that process works. And it's really exciting. It's hard. And I find I need to be more like Moses a lot. I need to remember that God is with us in a way that is not this supernatural God coming down and doing it all for me, but in a way that expands the circle of who I am, of who we are as ministers, to include all the people that are part of it, but also to include this mystery that's with all of us. This mystery that is always needing to be rekindled, that is always needing to be touched again and touched anew. I'm grateful to all of you for helping that happen. Amen.